The massive space station spun slowly against the stars, its metal surface gleaming in the light of 3 distant suns. Kepler Station was the size of a small moon, home to delegates from 12 different alien species. For nearly 200 years, it had been the center of galactic politics, where wars were prevented and peace was maintained. Ambassador Claire Rodriguez walked through the long corridors of the diplomatic wing, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. She had been Earth's representative for 15 years, and in that time she had solved more conflicts than any other diplomat in the galaxy. Other species respected her calm voice and fair decisions. They called her the peacemaker. But today felt different. Claire could sense tension in the air like electricity before a storm. Alien delegates whispered in small groups, their conversations stopping when she passed. Their eyes followed her with looks she had never seen before. Not respect. Something else. Something that made her uncomfortable. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty Humanities flagship. Through the great windows, he could see Kepler Station rotating peacefully. His ship and 5 others floated nearby, their weapons powered down as always. The human fleet was there for protection, but they had not fired a shot in anger for over 50 years. Jake was proud of that record. Humans had earned their place in the galaxy through patience and wisdom, not violence. While other species fought wars, humans built hospitals. While others conquered planets, humans shared technology. It was the human way, and it had made them trusted throughout known space. Dr. Helen Carter sat in her laboratory, surrounded by samples from dozens of different worlds. As the galaxy's leading expert on alien biology, she had spent her career helping species understand each other. Her research had prevented 3 wars and saved countless lives. The lab walls were covered with awards from grateful civilizations. Helen was working on her latest project, a study of how different species could live together on the same planets. The Galactic Council had requested the research, saying it was vital for future colonization efforts. She believed in the work completely. After all, understanding led to peace, and peace was what humans did best. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner reviewed security reports in his small office aboard the Liberty. As military liaison between the fleet and the diplomatic corps, his job was to keep everyone safe while maintaining the human reputation for nonviolence. It was a balance he had managed perfectly for 10 years. The reports on his desk were routine. Trade disputes between the Nexari and Zephyrians, border tensions in the Outer Rim, mining rights arguments on 3 different worlds. Nothing that human diplomacy could not solve, as it always did. Alex believed deeply that there was no problem that could not be fixed with enough patience and goodwill. On the station's main diplomatic level, War Chief Scalix of the Vorthak Empire paced back and forth like a caged animal. His reptilian features were twisted with frustration as he spoke to his aides in their harsh, clicking language. The Vorthak were proud warriors who respected only strength, and they had grown tired of human weakness. For decades, humans had been given the best trade, roots, the richest colonies, and the most respect in the Galactic Council. They achieved this not through conquest or intimidation, but through their endless talking and compromising. To Scalix, this was disgusting. Real power came from the barrel of a gun, not from soft words and gentle smiles. The Zephyrian representative, a tall insect-like being called Hive Mind Zix, communicated with its collective through rapid antenna movements. The Zephyrians were a logical species who valued efficiency above all else. They saw human emotions as a weakness that made them unreliable partners. How could you trust beings who made decisions based on feelings instead of pure logic? In the aquatic section of the station, Ambassador Coral Song of the Nexari Confederation floated in her specialized water chamber. The Nexari had evolved in the deep oceans of their homeworld, and they valued tradition and order. To them, humans were dangerous because they adapted too quickly. They changed their methods, their technology, even their society when needed. This flexibility threatened the careful balance that kept galactic civilization stable. None of these species openly opposed humanity. That would have been politically impossible given human influence in the Council. Instead, they worked quietly, building alliances and waiting for the right moment to act. They told themselves that humans had grown too powerful, too influential. It was time to remind them of their proper place. The moment they had been waiting for came when long-range scouts discovered something extraordinary on the edge of human space. The planet Harmony Prime, settled by humans 2 centuries ago, sat on top of the largest deposit of rare crystals ever found. These crystals powered faster than light travel and were worth more than entire star systems. War Chief Skalix smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. Ancient Vorthak records, carefully preserved and recently translated, showed that their ancestors had visited the Harmony Prime system over 1,000 years ago. It was a weak claim by galactic law, but it might be enough, especially if other species supported it. The plan was simple and elegant. Challenge human ownership of Harmony Prime using historical claims. Other species would back the challenge, citing various legal and political reasons. The humans would protest, of course, but they would not fight. They never fought. Eventually, they would compromise, giving up some of their claim in exchange for peace. It would be the beginning of the end of human influence. Once other species saw that humans could be pushed around, more challenges would follow. Better trade deals, more favorable treaties, superior colony rights. Step by step, humans would be reduced from galactic leaders to galactic servants. What none of them understood was that human patience, like all things, had limits. They had mistaken restraint for weakness, diplomacy for cowardice, and peace for surrender. They were about to learn the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. Ambassador Rodriguez received the formal challenge late that evening. As she read the documents claiming Vorthak ownership of Harmony Prime, she felt something cold settle in her stomach. 3 million human colonists lived on that world. They had built cities, raised families, and created a civilization over 2 centuries. It was not just a planet, it was home. She looked out her window at the stars and made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. She would fight this challenge through proper legal channels. She would use every diplomatic tool at her disposal. She would exhaust every peaceful option available. She had no idea that her opponents had already decided that none of those options would work. The emergency session of the Galactic Council began at dawn. Ambassador Rodriguez had called for the meeting using humanity's ancient right to immediate hearing when their colonies were threatened. She walked into the great chamber with her head held high, carrying files that contained 2 centuries of legal documents proving human ownership of Harmony Prime. The chamber was a massive dome filled with seats designed for 12 different species. Each delegation sat in their own section with specialized environments. The Nixari had their water tanks, the ethereals floated in their energy fields, and the Vorthak sat on heated stone platforms. At the center, Council Speaker Thymon of the Ethereal Consortium presided over the session with his glowing, translucent form. Claire approached the speaker's platform and activated the universal translator. Her voice carried clearly to every corner of the chamber as she began her presentation. She showed old Earth records of the first human ships reaching Harmony Prime. She displayed colonial charters signed by the previous Galactic Council. She presented birth certificates of children who had been born on the planet and grown old there. The evidence was overwhelming. By every law in the Galactic Legal Code, Harmony Prime belonged to humanity. Claire finished her presentation and looked around the chamber with confidence. She had done this hundreds of times before. Facts were facts and the law was the law. War Chief Skalix rose from his stone seat, his massive form casting shadows across the chamber. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding rocks. He dismissed all of Claire's evidence with a wave of his clawed hand. Ancient Vorthak claims, he said, came before human law. His people had marked the system with sacred stones over 1,000 years ago. The fact that humans could not read Vorthak writing did not make their claim invalid. The argument was ridiculous, and everyone in the chamber knew it. By the same logic, any species could claim any world by saying their ancestors had visited it long ago. But as Claire looked around the chamber, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The other delegates were nodding thoughtfully, as if Skalix was making perfect sense. Ambassador Coral Song of the Nixari spoke next. She said that rapid human expansion had always been a concern for older species. Perhaps it was time to review all human colonial claims to make sure they followed proper procedures. Her words were calm and reasonable, but Claire heard the threat beneath them. Hive mind Zix of the Zephyrians agreed. Human emotional decision-making, it said, often led to hasty colonization without proper consideration of other species' rights. A thorough investigation was needed to ensure galactic stability. One by one, the other delegates spoke. None directly supported the Vorthak claim, but all found reasons why the case needed more study, more investigation, more time. The vote was postponed indefinitely while a special committee would review the evidence. Claire sat in stunned silence as the session ended. She had presented ironclad proof of human ownership, and the council had decided to ignore it. This was not how galactic law was supposed to work. This was not how civilization behaved. Captain Morrison received Claire's report while standing on the bridge of the Liberty. His officers gathered around him as he read the summary aloud. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's engines. After a long moment, Lieutenant Commander Turner spoke what everyone was thinking. The fix was in. This was not about legal claims or ancient rights. This was about power. And someone had decided that humans had too much of it. Jake pulled up tactical displays of the Harmony Prime system. Long-range sensors showed Vorthak ships moving into position around the planet. They were not making any threatening moves yet, but their intention was clear. The committee could take as long as it wanted to make its decision. The Vorthak were already treating the planet as their own. Dr. Carter learned about the council session from a colleague who approached her in the station's cafeteria. The news hit her like a physical blow. She had friends on Harmony Prime, fellow scientists who had worked with her for years. Some had children who had never seen any other world. Helen tried to focus on her work but found herself staring at the wall display that showed pictures from her research trips to Harmony Prime. The planet was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents that reminded her of Earth. The human colonists had been careful to preserve the natural environment while building their cities. It was everything that humanity stood for in the galaxy. That afternoon, Helen received a message that made her situation even worse. The Galactic Science Council had reviewed her research grant and decided not to renew it. Her project on multi-species colonization was being terminated immediately. The reason given was budget constraints, but Helen knew better. Her research had become politically inconvenient. Over the following days, the pattern became clear. Human trade ships began reporting delays at border checkpoints. Cargo inspections that usually took hours now took days. Several ships had been detained for minor paperwork errors that had never mattered before. Alex Turner compiled reports from across human space. The Zephyrian Collective had closed 2 major trade routes to human vessels, citing security concerns. The same routes remained open to all other species. Human businesses on mixed-species worlds found their licenses under review. Human students at alien universities were told their visas might not be renewed. Each incident by itself could be explained away. Bureaucratic delays, security concerns, administrative reviews. But taken together, they formed a clear pattern of harassment and intimidation. Someone was sending humanity a message. Claire worked 18-hour days trying to find a diplomatic solution. She scheduled meetings with every major delegation, calling in favors earned over 15 years of faithful service. The responses were always the same: polite regrets, scheduling conflicts, and vague promises to discuss the matter later. Species that had once competed for human attention now avoided her completely. The Altarian trade minister, who had attended her birthday party just 6 months ago, refused to return her calls. The Centauran ambassador, who had named his daughter after Claire, would not meet her eyes in the corridors. The isolation was deliberate and complete. Humanity was being cut off from the galactic community, one relationship at a time. Claire realized that the Harmony Prime crisis was just the beginning. This was about more than one planet. This was about humanity's place in the galaxy. On the 5th day after the council session, Claire received an encrypted message from Earth. The content was brief but devastating. 3 more human colonies had received legal challenges from different species. Ancient claims, historical rights, and bureaucratic technicalities were being used to question human ownership of worlds they had settled for generations. The message included intelligence reports showing military buildups near human space. Nothing overtly threatening, just routine exercises and patrol increases. But the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. While human diplomats were being tied up in legal proceedings, alien fleets were moving into position. Claire stared out her office window at the stars and felt something she had never experienced in 15 years of diplomacy. For the first time in her career, she began to doubt that patience and goodwill would be enough to solve this crisis. The galaxy's most trusted peacemaker was starting to realize that some problems could not be talked away. Some enemies could not be reasoned with. Some fights could not be avoided no matter how much you wanted peace. But Claire Rodriguez was still a diplomat, and diplomats never gave up. She would find a way to save Harmony Prime and protect the human colonies. She would use every legal tool, every political connection, and every diplomatic trick she had learned in decades of service. She had no way of knowing that her opponents had already decided that none of those things would be allowed to work. The trap was closing around humanity, and escape would require something that humans had not used in 2 centuries. It would require them to stop being diplomatic. 3 weeks had passed since the council session, and nothing had improved. Claire Rodriguez sat in her office reading reports that got worse every day. Human merchants were being turned away from ports across the galaxy. Students were expelled from universities. Diplomatic staff were asked to leave their posts for reasons that made no sense. The special committee studying Harmony Prime had not met once. Every time Claire requested a hearing, she was told the members were busy with other matters. Meanwhile, Vorthak ships continued to gather around the human colony. Long-range scans showed at least 30 warships now surrounding the planet. Claire tried calling Earth for instructions, but the response was always the same. Keep trying diplomatic solutions. Avoid conflict at all costs. Do not give other species any excuse to claim that humans were aggressive or warlike. The government back home still believed that patience would win in the end. Captain Morrison watched his tactical displays with growing frustration. The Vorthak fleet around Harmony Prime had grown to over 50 ships, including several massive dreadnoughts that could crack a planet's surface. His own fleet consisted of 6 vessels designed for protection, not conquest. They were outnumbered 10 to 1. Jake had requested permission to reinforce the human colony, but the Coalition Defense Committee had denied his request. Moving additional ships to Harmony Prime would be seen as aggressive, they said. It might provoke the very conflict everyone was trying to avoid. The irony was bitter. Human ships were not allowed to protect human colonies because it might look threatening to the aliens who were already threatening those same colonies with invasion fleets. Dr. Carter tried to focus on her remaining research projects, but her heart was not in the work. Half her staff had been transferred to other duties or sent back to human space. Her laboratory, once bustling with activity, now felt empty and cold. Helen had received informal word that her position might be eliminated entirely. Budget cuts, they said, though everyone knew the real reason. Her research into peaceful coexistence between species had become an embarrassment to aliens who no longer wanted to coexist peacefully. That morning, Helen had received a message from her colleague, Dr. Ryan Bell, on Harmony Prime. The colonists were scared but determined to stay on their world. They had been building lives there for generations. Many had never lived anywhere else. Where could 3 million people go even if they wanted to leave? Lieutenant Commander Turner compiled his daily intelligence report with hands that shook, slightly from anger. The pattern of harassment had expanded into systematic persecution. Human freighters were being boarded and searched for contraband that was never found. Human diplomats were being arrested on minor charges and held for days before being released. The most disturbing development was happening on mixed colonies where humans lived alongside other species. Local authorities were suddenly discovering violations of residence permits that had been valid for decades. Human families were being told they had to leave their homes within 30 days. Alex had served in the human military for 20 years, and he recognized what he was seeing. This was not random discrimination. This was a coordinated campaign designed to force humanity out of galactic civilization entirely. Someone had decided that humans no longer belonged among the stars. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when War Chief Skalex requested an emergency broadcast to all inhabited worlds. Ambassador Rodriguez watched from her office as the reptilian warrior appeared on screens across the galaxy. His message was simple and devastating. The Vorthak Empire, Skalex announced, had grown tired of waiting for the special committee to reach its obvious conclusion. Ancient Vorthak claims to the Harmony Prime system were clear and undeniable. Human occupation of the world was illegal and had to end immediately. The human colonists, Skalex continued with what might have been generosity in his voice, would be given 72 hours to evacuate the planet peacefully. The Vorthak Empire was prepared to provide transportation to a more suitable world where humans could live without violating ancient territorial claims. Claire felt her blood turn to ice as Skalex described this suitable world. It was a frozen planet called Exile, in a system at the edge of known space. The world was barely habitable, with temperatures that never rose above freezing, and an atmosphere that required breathing equipment. It was essentially a prison planet, where humans would slowly die of cold and isolation. The colonists would be allowed to bring only personal possessions, Skalex explained. All infrastructure, all buildings, all the work of 2 centuries would remain behind for the rightful owners. It was, he said, a generous offer that demonstrated Vorthak mercy toward inferior species. But the worst part came at the end of the announcement. This arrangement, Skalex said with obvious satisfaction, would serve as a template for resolving similar disputes with other human colonies. The implication was crystal clear. Harmony Prime was just the first step in a plan to strip humanity of every world they had settled. Claire sat in stunned silence as the broadcast ended. She had spent her entire career believing that reason could triumph over hatred, that patience could overcome aggression. But this was not a dispute that could be resolved through careful negotiation. This was conquest disguised as legal process. Her communicator buzzed with an incoming message from Captain Morrison. His voice was tight with controlled fury as he reported what his sensors were detecting. The Vorthak fleet around Harmony Prime was powering up weapons and moving into bombardment positions. They were not bluffing about their 72-hour deadline. Dr. Carter called from her laboratory with news that made the situation even worse. She had been monitoring alien communication networks and discovered something horrifying. The forced relocation plan was being discussed openly on several worlds as a model for dealing with the human problem. Other species were already identifying human colonies they wanted to challenge. Alex Turner's intelligence sources confirmed their worst fears. Military buildups were occurring near at least a dozen human worlds. Legal challenges were being prepared by half the species in the galaxy. The attack on Harmony Prime was just the opening move in a campaign to drive humanity from civilized space entirely. That evening, Claire called an emergency meeting of all human personnel on Kepler Station. The room was small and cramped, holding perhaps 20 people who represented humanity's entire diplomatic presence in the galaxy. They looked to her for answers, for hope, for some way to save 3 million innocent people from exile and death. Claire looked around the room at faces she had worked with for years. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to building bridges between species and maintaining galactic peace. They had believed, as she had believed, that patience and goodwill would eventually be rewarded. She thought about the message she would have to send to Earth. How could she explain that 2 centuries of careful diplomacy had collapsed in 3 weeks? How could she tell her government that the galactic community they had worked so hard to join was now working equally hard to expel them? The silence in the room stretched on as everyone waited for her to speak. Finally, Claire stood and walked to the window that looked out at the stars. Somewhere among those points of light was Harmony Prime, where 3 million humans faced exile or death. Somewhere else was Earth, still believing that talking could solve any problem. Claire Rodriguez had spent 15 years as humanity's voice in the galaxy. She had negotiated treaties, prevented wars, and built friendships with dozens of species. She was known across known space as the peacemaker, the diplomat who could find common ground between any 2 sides. But as she stood looking at the stars, Claire felt something inside her begin to change. For the first time in her career, she began to wonder if peace was worth preserving when the other side had already chosen war. The galaxy was about to learn that even the most patient diplomat had limits, and humanity's most famous peacemaker was very close to finding hers. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 18 hours after Skalix's ultimatum. Ambassador Rodriguez had demanded one final hearing, using the last of her diplomatic privileges to address the assembled delegates. She walked into the chamber knowing this would be her last chance to save Harmony Prime through peaceful means. The great dome buzzed with conversation as delegates from 12 species took their seats. Many seemed excited, as if they were about to witness something entertaining rather than the exile of 3 million innocent people. War Chief Skalix lounged on his stone platform with obvious satisfaction, occasionally checking the time display that showed how many hours remained in his deadline. Claire approached the speaker's platform with careful, measured steps. In her hands, she carried no documents, no legal briefs, no evidence. She had tried all of those approaches and failed. This time she would speak from the heart and hope that somewhere in this chamber, someone still remembered what civilization was supposed to mean. She activated the universal translator and began to speak. Her voice was steady but carried an undertone of pain that made even the most hostile delegates pay attention. She did not talk about law or politics or ancient territorial claims. Instead, she talked about the people of Harmony Prime. She spoke about Maria Santos, a teacher who had spent 40 years educating children from 6 different species in the colony's integrated schools. She talked about David Kim, a farmer whose techniques had helped feed not just humans but alien refugees from 3 different wars. She described Dr. Lucy White, who had developed medical treatments that saved lives across the galaxy regardless of species. These were not conquerors or warriors, Claire said. These were teachers and farmers and doctors who had spent their lives building something beautiful on a world they had called home for 2 centuries. They had never hurt anyone. They had never threatened anyone. All they wanted was to continue living in peace on the world where they had been born. The chamber listened in silence as Claire described what exile to the frozen world of exile would mean. Families torn apart, children separated from their grandparents, a civilization built over generations destroyed in a matter of days. It would be a slow death sentence for 3 million innocent people. Claire finished her speech and looked around the chamber. She saw alien faces that showed everything from boredom to amusement to open hostility. Not one delegate seemed moved by her words. Not one species appeared willing to stand up for basic decency and justice. Council Speaker Thyman floated at the center of the chamber, his energy form flickering as he prepared to respond. His voice carried the cold authority of someone who had already made his decision. The special committee, he announced, had reviewed all the evidence and reached a conclusion. The Vorthak claim to Harmony Prime was valid under ancient territorial laws that superseded more recent human settlements. The human colonists would be relocated to more appropriate worlds as War Chief Skalix had generously offered. The matter was closed. Claire felt something break inside her chest as the words registered. 2 centuries of human presence meant nothing. Legal documents signed by previous councils meant nothing. The lives and dreams of 3 million people meant nothing. The galaxy had spoken and it had chosen cruelty over justice. But the worst was yet to come. As Council Speaker Thyman prepared to close the session, a young Nexari aide approached the human section. Claire recognized him as Tidepool, barely past adolescence and eager to impress his elders. He carried what appeared to be an official message. Instead of delivering any message, Tidepool stopped in front of Claire's desk and smiled. Then he spat a stream of acidic fluid that splashed across the small holographic projector that sat on her workspace. The acid ate through the electronics with a hissing sound that echoed through the chamber. The projector had displayed a picture of Claire's daughter, Katie, who had died 5 years earlier defending a research station from pirates. Katie Rodriguez had been a xenobiologist like Dr. Carter, dedicated to building understanding between species. She had died believing that different races could live together in peace and harmony. Now her image dissolved in alien acid as the young Nexari aide grinned with satisfaction. He returned to his delegation, where older Nexari congratulated him for his creativity and boldness. War Chief Scalix laughed loud enough for the entire chamber to hear, slapping his knee in appreciation of the joke. The chamber erupted in scattered laughter and applause from various delegations. To them, this was amusing entertainment. The destruction of a memorial to a dead human was just another way to show humanity its new place in the galaxy. The acid continued to eat through the projector, filling the air with acrid smoke. Claire stared at the ruined device that had held the last image of her daughter. Katie had been 28 when she died, full of hope and dreams about a better future for all species. She had given her life protecting alien scientists from human pirates, believing that such sacrifice would build bridges between civilizations. The chamber fell silent as Claire continued to stare at the destroyed memorial. Her composure, maintained through years of insults and betrayals, finally began to crack. The laughter died away as delegates sensed that something fundamental was changing in the atmosphere. When Claire finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but every being in the chamber heard her words with perfect clarity. "You have made a mistake." Dr. Carter felt the change immediately from her seat in the science section. The familiar weight of human patience and diplomacy seemed to evaporate from the chamber, replaced by something that made her alien colleagues suddenly shift uncomfortably in their seats. Captain Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his communicator as if responding to some unheard signal. "For 200 years, Claire continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, "we have chosen peace over justice, forgiveness over retribution, hope over experience. We believed that patience and goodwill would eventually be rewarded with respect and friendship. We were wrong." The universal translator struggled with the subtle changes in her tone, unable to convey the full impact of her words to non-human ears, but they understood enough. The young Nexari aide who had destroyed the memorial suddenly looked less confident, backing toward his delegation as Claire's gaze fixed on him. "You want to see what happens when human composure finally breaks? You want to know what we are truly capable of when we stop being diplomatic?" Claire's voice carried across the chamber like a physical force. "You are about to find out." Lieutenant Commander Turner watched from the observer's gallery as every human in the chamber seemed to stand a little straighter. Something had changed in their posture, in their expressions, in the very air around them. The aliens were beginning to sense it too, and many looked uncertain for the first time. Claire activated her emergency communicator, the device that could reach every human vessel, colony, and outpost in known space simultaneously. Her finger hovered over the transmission button for just a moment as she considered the consequences of what she was about to do. 2 centuries of careful diplomacy would end with her next words. The age of human patience would be over. The galaxy that had chosen to see mercy as weakness was about to learn the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to fight. Claire pressed the button and spoke 2 words that would change the fate of every civilization in known space. "Restraints off." The message went out at the speed of light, racing toward human colonies and fleets across the galaxy. In command centers and military bases, in research stations and diplomatic posts, humans who had spent their lives being patient and peaceful received the signal they had never expected to hear. The age of human mercy was over. The age of human reckoning had begun. Ambassador Rodriguez looked around the chamber one last time, meeting the eyes of delegates who had thought they understood what humans were. They were about to learn that they had never seen humanity at all. They had only seen what humans chose to show when they were being diplomatic. The galaxy was about to discover what humans looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The transformation began within minutes of Ambassador Rodriguez's message. Across the galaxy, human commanders who had spent decades following rules of engagement that favored peace over victory suddenly found themselves free to act without restraint. The change was immediate and terrifying. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, as his crew worked with efficiency that surprised even him. For 50 years, Human ships had operated under strict power limitations, designed to appear non-threatening to other species. Safety protocols had kept their weapons at minimum settings. Diplomatic concerns had prevented them from using their full capabilities. All of those restrictions disappeared with 2 words. The Liberty's engines roared to life with power levels that made the ship tremble. Weapon systems that had never been fired at full capacity began charging with energy readings that sent alarm signals throughout the alien fleet. The human escorts followed suit, their hulls glowing with barely contained power. The Vorthak fleet around Harmony Prime had expected to face 6 small human ships that would retreat rather than fight. Instead, they found themselves confronting vessels that moved faster than their sensors could track and hit harder than anything they had ever encountered. The battle was over in less than an hour. Vorthak dreadnoughts that had terrorized entire star systems were cut apart by human weapons that seemed to ignore shields and armor. Ships that had ruled space for generations found themselves helpless against human technology that had been hidden behind diplomatic concerns for 2 centuries. War Chief Skalax watched his flagship's bridge explode around him as human boarding parties carved through his defenses like they were made of paper. The reptilian warrior had spent his life studying warfare, but nothing had prepared him for humans in actual combat. They moved with precision that seemed impossible, fought with determination that bordered on madness, and showed mercy only to those who surrendered immediately. Lieutenant Commander Turner led the assault on the Vorthak command ship with a smile that would have terrified his former diplomatic colleagues. For 10 years he had watched human colonists suffer, while his hands were tied by rules and regulations. Now those rules were gone, and the galaxy was about to learn why humans had rules in the first place. The Vorthak Empire had built its reputation on fear and intimidation. Their warriors were supposed to be unstoppable in personal combat. But when faced with humans who no longer cared about appearing civilized, they discovered that evolution had played a cruel joke on them. Humans were persistence predators, designed by millions of years of natural selection to outlast and outfight anything that threatened their survival. Dr. Carter watched the reports coming in from across human space with a mixture of satisfaction and horror. The research that she had shared freely with alien colleagues for decades was being turned against them with devastating effect. Every weakness she had identified in alien biology, every vulnerability she had documented in the name of scientific cooperation, was now being exploited by human military forces. The Zephyrian Collective discovered that their missing human trade ships had been found in secret research facilities. The crews were dead, killed in experiments that violated every treaty in the Galactic legal code. The revelation triggered a human response that left entire Zephyrian systems silent and dark. The insectoid species had always prided themselves on logical thinking and efficient organization. But logic meant nothing when faced with human fury that burned hotter than any star. Their hive minds, so effective at coordination, became liabilities when human computer viruses infiltrated their networks and turned their own technology against them. The Nexari, Confederation's closed trade routes became meaningless when human vessels began operating outside Coalition space entirely. The aquatic species had controlled interstellar commerce for centuries through their monopoly on certain shipping lanes. Now they watched helplessly as human ships opened new routes that bypassed their territory completely. Ambassador Coralsong floated in her water tank on Kepler Station, watching reports of human fleets destroying Nexari trading posts with surgical precision. The attacks were not random violence but carefully planned operations that crippled Nexari economic power while leaving their populations unharmed. It was warfare conducted with the same patience and attention to detail that had once made humans such effective diplomats. On Kepler Station itself, the atmosphere had changed completely. Alien delegates who had spent weeks celebrating humanity's impending exile now huddled in their quarters, afraid to venture into corridors where human personnel moved with new purpose. The same humans who had served coffee and filed paperwork now carried themselves like soldiers preparing for war. Claire Rodriguez stood in the main communications center, coordinating the human response with calm efficiency that terrified alien observers. The woman who had been known across the galaxy as the Peacemaker was now directing military operations with the same skill she had once used to prevent conflicts. Reports flowed in from across known space. The Altarian Republic, which had refused to meet with Claire just days earlier, was begging for negotiations as human fleets appeared in their home system. The Centauran Empire, which had expelled human students from their universities, was offering reparations and apologies as human forces surrounded their capital world. Species that had spent weeks coordinating attacks on human colonies now found themselves facing a coordinated response that demonstrated just how much humans had been holding back. Trade networks collapsed as human merchants withdrew from alien markets. Research programs stalled as human scientists recalled their data and expertise. Defense systems failed as human engineers remotely disabled technology they had helped to design. Type Galaxy learned that humans had not just been participants in galactic civilization. They had been the foundation that held it together. Without human patience, human innovation, and human willingness to compromise, the entire structure began to collapse. Some species tried to fight back, but their efforts only made things worse. The Ethereal Consortium attempted to use their energy, manipulation abilities against human ships, only to discover that human vessels were shielded with technology that turned their attacks into additional power for human weapons. The Corvin Alliance launched a surprise attack on a human research station, expecting to find defenseless scientists. Instead, they encountered researchers who had spent decades studying alien weaknesses and were now eager to test their theories in practical application. One by one, the species that had thought themselves superior to humanity found themselves begging for the mercy they had denied to human colonists. But mercy was a luxury that humans no longer offered freely. It had to be earned through genuine repentance and substantial reparations. Warchief Skalix, captured during the Battle for Harmony Prime, was brought before a human military tribunal. The proud warrior who had laughed at human weakness now faced judges who spoke in the same calm, reasonable tones that had once characterized human diplomacy. But their words carried the weight of absolute authority, backed by overwhelming force. The sentence was exile to the same frozen world that Skalix had planned for human colonists. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The Vorthak Empire could keep their ancient territorial claims, but they would have to enforce them from a prison planet at the edge of known space. Dr. Carter was offered a new position as head of the Human Science Directorate, with unlimited resources and complete freedom to pursue any research she deemed necessary. Her first project involved studying alien psychology to understand how they had convinced themselves that mercy was weakness and patience was cowardice. Captain Morrison received a promotion to Fleet Admiral and command of forces that now patrolled former Coalition space with casual authority. The same aliens who had once dictated terms to human diplomats now requested permission to enter systems that humans had claimed through right of conquest. The transformation was complete within 6 months. The Galactic Coalition, which had ruled known space for over 1,000 years, collapsed as member species found themselves unable to function without human cooperation. In its place rose a new order where humans set the rules and aliens followed them. The memorial to Katie Rodriguez was rebuilt in the center of New Geneva, the human capital that replaced Kepler Station as the center of galactic government. Beings from across the galaxy made pilgrimages to see it, not out of respect but out of necessity. They needed to remember the moment when they had pushed humanity too far. Ambassador Rodriguez, now holding the title of Director General of Galactic Affairs, delivered her final address to the assembled species of known space. Her words were broadcast to every inhabited world, translated into every known language and recorded for posterity. "You asked to see what humans are capable of when our composure finally snaps," she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had once sought peace rather than demanding it. "You wanted to know what we look like when we stop being diplomatic. Now you know." She paused, looking out at an audience that hung on her every word. The age of human patience is over. The age of human dominance has begun. Remember this moment, because no species will ever forget the day humanity stopped pretending to be civilized.